Picture this. You're standing on the edge of a cliff in the desert. The sun's going down, casting these long, twisted shadows across the valley. There's smoke in the air. You can smell it. And somewhere in the distance, you hear screaming. But here's what makes your blood run cold. Down below you, soldiers are moving through a village with terrifying precision. They're not fighting an army. They're rounding up women, daughters of noble families. One by one, they're being dragged forward, begging, pleading, and then silence. This isn't a random massacre. This is something far more calculated. A king so paranoid, so desperate to hold on to power, that he's willing to slaughter thousands of women from his own bloodline just to eliminate any threat to his throne. What you're about to hear is one of history's most disturbing purges, buried in the sand for over 2,000 years. Look, before we go any further, I need to be straight with you. This story gets dark. We're talking about systematic violence against women, pulled from the dusty corners of ancient history. The details are rough. Some of it's fragmentary, pieced together from old text ruins and, yeah, bones. If you need to tap out, no judgment. But if you stick around, here's what I promise. We're not here to wallow in the gore. We're here to understand the machine behind it, the paranoia, the politics, the sheer desperation of man who turned his own family into enemies. This wasn't some chaotic battle. This was a planned extermination, hidden at the edges of an empire, far from Rome's marble halls and Jerusalem's sacred stones. It happened in a brutal, unforgiving place called Idumea, where loyalty cracked like dry earth under pressure. The guy at the center of all this? Herod. Yeah, that Herod, the one you might have heard about from the Bible. But forget what you think you know. This man wasn't some cartoon villain. He was a self-made king who clawed his way to power through alliances with conquerors and betrayals of his own people. In this particular act, targeting the daughters of Idumea's noble houses, women connected to royal bloodlines that once rivaled his own, shows you just how fragile his grip on the crown really was. This wasn't just madness. It was a system. Spies everywhere. Soldiers enforcing silence. Fear stretching from palace hallways to remote desert plateaus. So, why does this still matter today? Because power built on erasure leaves scars, even in the sand. It reminds us how fragile empires really are, and how voices that were supposed to be forgotten can still echo through history and change everything we thought we knew. All right, let's rewind. To understand how we got to mass murder, we need to look at where this all started. Idumea. This was rough country south of Judea. Red cliffs meeting endless sand dunes. A place where survival meant bending the knee to whoever had the biggest army at the moment. This land was a legacy of Esau, the biblical twin brother of Jacob. His descendants carved out a kingdom in this harsh landscape. Later on, you'd see echoes of their craftsmanship in places like Petra, with those incredible rock-cut buildings, and along the crusty, salt-white shores of the Dead Sea. By the time Herod enters our story, Idumea stretched from Hebron down south, forming this buffer zone between Judea and the Nabatean Arabs. It was rich in trade routes. Caravans carrying spices, textiles, all kinds of valuable goods passed through. But politically, it was a mess. Tribes fighting each other, loyalties shifting with the wind. And foreign empires, Persians, Greeks, Romans, they all left their mark like footprints in the dust. This was an age of massive change. Alexander the Great had conquered the region, bringing Greek culture with him. Suddenly you had Greek gods mixing with local deities. Philosophy bumping up against ancient tribal laws. It was awkward, uncomfortable, and it created tension everywhere. But Judea, under these kings called Hasmoneans, they pushed back hard. In the late 2nd century BC, a king named John Hyrcanus led military campaigns south, conquering Idumean cities like Adora and Marissa. But here's the thing. He didn't just take the land. He demanded total submission. The Idumeans, proud descendants of Esau, faced an impossible choice. Get circumcised, adopt Jewish law, or get out. A lot of them stayed and converted, but it was forced. Altars to QoS, their storm god, were smashed and replaced with the commandments of Yahweh. This was integration at the point of a sword. Your rivals suddenly became your reluctant family. But that resentment, it never went away. Idumeans became Jews on paper, but the old identity survived in whispered stories and hidden rituals. And from this tension, from this uncomfortable forced merger, rose a man named Antipater, Herod's father. This guy was sharp, ambitious, a survivor. He navigated the Hasmonean court like a desert fox, earning favor through loyalty and smart strategy. He got appointed governor of Idumea by Hyrcanus II, and then he married Cyprus, a Nabatean princess. So now you've got Idumean grit mixed with Arab political savvy. Their son, Herod, born around 73 BC, inherited a world that was already falling apart at the seams. Herod wasn't raised in luxury. He grew up in the middle of political storms. Roman legions marching in, Parthian forces threatening from the east. As a kid, he watched his father make alliances with Julius Caesar after Pompey conquered Jerusalem in 63 BC. Caesar rewarded Antipater with Roman citizenship and tax breaks, elevating the family from outsiders to major power brokers. But power always leaves scars. Herod's teenage years were shaped by betrayal and blood. When Hyrcanus II got into it with his brother Aristobulus II, Antipater backed Hyrcanus and dragged young Herod into the fight. By age 15, Herod was governing Galilee, and he crushed bandit groups with ruthless efficiency. We're talking executions without trial. Rome loved it. Judea was horrified. The Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, summoned him to answer for his actions. Herod showed up in purple robes with armed soldiers. It was a power move. He basically got off because Rome intervened. And the lesson stuck in his mind. Strength matters more than law. Then everything changed. In 40 BC, Parthian forces invaded Judea and installed Antigonus, a Hasmonean, as king. Antipater was poisoned. Herod's brother Phasael was captured and killed. Herod had to run for his life, heading south to rescue his family at Masada, that sheer cliff fortress he'd later turn into an icon of his rule. From there, he raced to Rome. Through charm and political instinct, Herod won over Mark Antony and Octavian. The Senate named him King of the Jews. But a title meant nothing without conquest. 3 brutal years of war followed, ending with the siege of Jerusalem. Herod took the city by force. Antigonus was executed. The throne was his. But victory tasted bitter. To a lot of people in Judea, Herod was still an Idumean usurper, only partially Jewish, never fully legitimate. To strengthen his claim, he married Miriam, a Hasmonean princess, tying his bloodline to ancient royalty. But paranoia came with the crown. Whispers of plots echoed through his court. Memories of his father's assassination ate at him. Slowly, the ambitious climber became a haunted ruler. Miriam's family, once his bridge to legitimacy, became in his mind a nest of conspirators. Her grandfather, Hyrcanus II, was executed. Her brother-in-law drowned under, let's say, suspicious circumstances. These weren't random acts. They came from Herod's deepest fear, that his Idumean roots would be used to destroy him. And Idumea itself remained a problem. Noble houses, there still had claims to autonomy. Their daughters married into bloodlines that could challenge Herod's hybrid dynasty. They represented continuity. Bloodlines unbroken by conquest. Then, in the shadows of 29 BC, the whispers grew louder, and the purge began. By the way, quick question for you watching this. Where are you tuning in from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where this story is reaching. All right, back to it. The rumors didn't start in the palace. They started in the markets of Marissa, Idumea's beating heart. Merchants spoke in lowered voices. Nobles exchanged looks that lingered just a little too long. Descendants of old Edomite kings, families who remember a time before forced conversion. They were chafing under Herod's rule, and their daughters, educated, wealthy, connected by blood to ancient royal lines. They became living symbols of everything Herod feared. These women were potential brides. political currency. They could birth rivals. Herod's network of informants reported secret gatherings, conversations disguised as weddings or funerals, coded messages hinting at alliances, maybe with Nabatea, maybe even with Rome's enemies. The reports kept piling up. Whether every word was true hardly mattered anymore. Suspicion had become its own reality. One name that's been preserved, we'll call her Livia. She represents many women whose real names history never fully recorded. A high-born Edomite woman, daughter of a converted chieftain, refined, intelligent, fiercely loyal to her heritage beneath a surface of calm obedience. When Herod summoned her to Jerusalem, it was supposedly for betrothal negotiations, a gesture meant to signal unity. Livia arrived with her entourage, passing through gates of dressed stone into Herod's palace. The halls were lined with frescoes of Greek gods, all muscles and violence, clashing in eternal struggle. It sat uneasily against the austere traditions of Jewish law. Her robes were embroidered with subtle Idumean patterns. She didn't bow her head as deeply as the others. Herod questioned her at length, asked about her family, her loyalties, her hopes for the future. Livia spoke carefully, choosing words that suggested unity without surrender. But beneath those calm answers, there was an edge, a reminder that forced conversions didn't erase memory. That night, Herod couldn't sleep. He dreamed of crowds rising against him, of banners bearing old Idumean symbols, of his throne collapsing into dust beneath his feet. He woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. In his mind, the threat crystallized. These women weren't passive figures. They were vessels of rebellion. Their marriages could bind coalitions. Their children could inherit claims stronger than his own. By dawn, his mind was made up. Orders went out quietly. Thracian mercenaries, foreign soldiers loyal only to coin, were dispatched to Idumea's noble quarters. Their instructions were simple. Root out the threat. Eliminate it completely. Livia's household was among the first surrounded. Soldiers burst through the gates as her family pleaded for mercy. Livia stood her ground, defiant even as hands seized her arms. "This is your blood, too," she spat at them, invoking Esau's legacy, the shared ancestry Herod had spent his life both using and denying. But Herod's command didn't waver. She was dragged into the square. Her cries joined others already echoing through the streets, and it became horrifyingly clear. This was never about one woman. This was a system. Informants had identified targets. Captains enforced quotas. A purge designed to destroy Idumea's elite by cutting through its most vital lines, the women who carried the bloodlines. Word spread like wildfire through the valleys. Families fled to caves and ravines. Some sought refuge in sacred groves where altars to QoS once stood, hoping old gods might still protect them. But Herod's net kept tightening. Soldiers hunted methodically. Daughters were cornered. The violence itself lives in the silence that followed. Blades flashing in sunlight. Bodies left where vultures would find them. Herod justified it as mercy. Better a swift death than lingering treason, he told himself. But the numbers kept growing. Hundreds, then thousands, according to whispered accounts. Records blurred the truth, whether by design or just the decay of time. And yet one thing haunted him. Livia's final gaze. Not fear, recognition. As if she saw him more clearly than he wanted to see himself. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was strategy. By targeting Idumea's royal women, Herod severed the threads that could weave alliances against him. Not vengeance, he told his advisors. Preservation. History would repeat this logic many times. Think of later regimes that purged elites to consolidate power. Think of how gender becomes a weapon in political warfare. But even here, in the middle of the horror, cracks appeared. One soldier paused beneath the night sky, staring at the stars, wondering if the gods judged kings differently. The purge spread. From Marissa, troops moved south to Adora, then east toward the Dead Sea's briny shores. Idumea's harsh landscape became a graveyard. The red earth drank deep again. Let's shift perspective for a moment. There was this Roman centurion, we'll call him Gaius, seconded to Herod's guard. He'd seen war in Gaul, burned villages, crushed revolts. But this felt different. This was wrought from within an allied kingdom. Orders arrived sealed and final. Round up noble daughters. Question loyalties. Eliminate threats. Gaius watched compounds fall. Women herded like livestock. One young widow named Thea begged for her child's life. She offered secrets, hidden wealth, names. The machine didn't pause. There were no exceptions. As the purge spread, its machinery became visible. Tax records identified prominent families. Local informants traded names for favors. Land, protection, status. Villages emptied, not of men marching to war, but of women whose influence flowed through marriages and bloodlines. Entire family trees vanished. Gaius recorded the scale in his dispatches, his language growing colder with each entry. During one raid, he noted a strange detail. A blooming acacia tree left untouched. Its petals drifted to the ground like silent witnesses. Fragile beauty standing in sharp contrast to brutality unfolding around it. Another voice survived. Miriam, a handmaid who escaped toward the Nabatean border, later told what she saw. Families huddled in wadis, screams carried by the wind. She understood then that the purge targeted more than bodies. It aimed to erase the matriarchal threads that held Idumea together. There were fleeting moments of humanity. One dawn, exhausted soldiers shared bread with captives. For a breath of time, the killing paused. Then orders resumed. The climax came near the shadow of Masada, that looming plateau Herod would later fortify into legend. Scouts reported a gathering. Daughters from scattered noble houses had sought refuge in nearby caves. In Jerusalem, Herod raged. He demanded an end to it. Troops descended at first light. The ravine formed a natural choke point. Time seemed to slow. Pleas echoed off stone walls. Iron clashed. Dust filled the air. What followed is known only by its aftermath. Silence. Bodies scattered like broken statues. And that's when the first fracture appeared. A soldier defected. He whispered to Roman officials about a king unraveling, about orders driven not by reason, but by fear. Herod had overreached, turning violence inward against his own origins. The seeds of doubt were planted. They would grow quickly. Herod's grip tightened, even as his body began to fail. What broke first wasn't his power, but his flesh. An illness crept in slowly, then consumed him. Ancient accounts speak of agony. Skin ulcerating, bowels burning, a stench of decay that no perfume could mask. He retreated to the hot springs of Jericho, hoping heat might ease what medicine couldn't. It didn't. Fevered and raving, he was haunted by visions. Faces from the purge returned in his dreams. Among them, Livia's eyes stared back, unblinking. Fear followed him into his final years. His sons, sensing weakness, began to plot. Herod responded the only way he knew how. More executions. Suspicion became reflex. Trust vanished entirely. Days before his own death, he ordered the killing of Antipater, the son he'd once groomed as heir. In 4 BC, Herod died. There were no tears in the streets. His body was displayed in grand procession, golden bier, royal trappings, a final performance of power. But his burial was quiet, secretive, at Herodium, the artificial mountain he built for himself. The king was laid to rest, far from the people he'd ruled. The purge didn't end with him, but its purpose dissolved. Survivors scattered. Some fled south into Nabatea. Others stayed, assimilating more fully into Judea. Their Idumean identity faded with each generation. Rome, unimpressed by Herod's successors, divided the kingdom among his sons. Archelaus inherited Idumea, but ruled so badly that complaints reached the emperor. He was exiled within a decade. Ironically, Idumea was finally absorbed completely. By the time of the Jewish revolt in 66 AD, Idumeans were fighting as Jews against Rome. The lines Herod tried to erase had shifted, not vanished. And those documents once meant to justify the purge? Lists, decrees, confiscation records. They later became evidence of tyranny. They fueled resentment, feeding rebellions long after his death. Centuries passed. Sand covered blood. Ruin swallowed memory. But not completely. In the modern era, archaeology began to peel back the layers. In the 1960s, Yigal Yadin's team excavated Masada, uncovering Herod's palaces, frescoes, mosaics, bathhouses, proof of staggering ambition, grandeur carved into stone at the edge of a cliff. Elsewhere, quieter discoveries emerged. At Marissa and near Hebron, excavations revealed signs of violent disruption, burned villas, abandoned quarters, mass graves dated to the late 1st century BC. Many of the remains were female. Several bore marks consistent with execution. In 2007, Ehud Netzer uncovered Herod's tomb at Herodium, finally confirming the resting place of the king himself. The discovery forced historians to confront the full duality of his legacy: master builder, political survivor, and systematic destroyer. So why does this matter now? Because this story exposes a recurring pattern in human history. Hybrid identities caught between cultures, rulers who fear their own origins, power that turns inward and devours its own roots. We've seen it in modern dictators who purge ethnic kin to secure their rule. Herod's Edomite dilemma echoes across centuries. But there's resilience here, too. The women meant to vanish didn't disappear completely. Their bones speak. Their absence reshaped bloodlines. Their silence became a kind of testimony. Archaeology gave them back a voice that history tried to erase. Let's return finally to where we began. The ravine is quiet now. Cliffs stand watch, unmoved. The desert keeps its secrets well, but not forever. Herod's empire crumbled. His monuments weathered. But the land endured. These women were supposed to be erased. From scrolls, from memory, from blood. They weren't. They remain in whispers, in fragments, in the uneasy knowledge that power built on fear always collapses eventually. And now they're here with you because you listened. If this story hit you in some way, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button for Sinister Empires. We dig into the darkest corners of history that most people never hear about. The real stories. The uncomfortable ones. The ones that make you question everything you thought you knew about power and humanity. And listen, drop a comment below. Did this change how you see ancient power? What stood out to you most? Let's talk about it. And if you think someone else needs to hear this story, share it. The sands still hold more stories waiting to be told. More voices that refuse to stay buried. And we're just getting started.